Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Noah02, and I am quite excited here today. This is the first of many beginner's guides. I've been in the shoes of the noob. I might still have them on, but I've been playing, I've been grinding, I've been getting that knowledge, I've been thinking about things, I've been experiencing, I've been learning, watching replays. I'm going through the grind, just like many of you are, when it comes to Company of Heroes online multiplayer. What I have here for you today, beginner's guide on a truism, the most important, I believe, fundamental of Company of Heroes. That is retreating. Retreating your unit's overall unit preservation, and how freaking important it is to just keep your units alive. Keep material on the board for you to play around with. This is going to be a subject that we will return to multiple times. I'm sure of it. That's how important it is. In fact, this is a big rabbit hole of good retreats and bad retreats and all these varying circumstances of how long you should keep a unit in a fight and understanding retreat paths and getting flanks and watching out for your own retreat paths and not getting flanked yourself and understanding manpower bleed and things like that. All of this comes back to retreating and unit preservation. But we're going to keep it simple. Right? This is a beginner's guide. We're going to talk about three things. One, the concept of retreating, why it's so important. Two, a couple of things to think about, where you can get started, some basic concepts or ideas that will help you win fights, but also understand when you should get out of fights. And three, we'll talk about some things that you can practice, some things that you can think about and implement during your games that will actually make you better at retreating, or get just make you think about retreating, get better, focus on it, right? To just improve it overall. So, one, why is retreating so important? And we need to understand the economy of Company of Heroes 3. It's a slow grind. It's in a game of attrition. Those little green numbers under your resources, right? Your plus 200 and something or other for your manpower, your plus 23 for your fuel. Those green numbers represent the amount of resources you're gaining per minute. Per minute. So if you think about your manpower gain, which is like starts around like 270 and goes down as you increase your army population, a squad of infantry costs like 270. Thus, if you lose a squad, we can literally measure the amount of time it would take to replace it. Generating resources is rather fixed in Company of Heroes. There's not a whole lot you can do to increase it. And in fact, overall, your economy goes down as you build a bigger army. And of course, you can build resource caches, but let me tell you right now, they're bad. Maybe they're not, but right now it seems like they're pretty high risk, low reward. When it comes to resources on the map, obviously we want them, but again, we need to understand that it's about gaining those resources slowly over time, right? 23 fuel a minute. That's not very fast, but it is what we have, and we need to play around with it, and that's what our opponent has, and we need to understand that, right? But really, because units can cost 90 fuel and 300 manpower, losing that unit is a substantial amount of time. Trying to replace a unit that is lost can literally be measured in minutes. And if you are replacing lost squads of infantry, that is literally taking minutes away from your next big purchase, from your next big tech advancement, things like that. Not only that, is losing units so immediately impactful as far as your economy is concerned. Think about how you gain those map resources, right? In Company of Heroes, your economy is map control. And we'll talk about that concept later, but effectively, you need units to go out and capture points, and then those points give you resources. But if you're losing units, you don't have anything to capture with. If you're losing units and your opponent is not, guess what? Not only are you is like your amount of the amount of money that you need to immediately replace unit, that's a big impact. But also, too, in the long term, if they have more stuff than you, they'll just have an easier time controlling more of the map, and that will then result in them having a bigger economy than yours. So again, losing a unit, your army is essentially your best means of gaining more economy or maintaining your economy and things like that. So, what do we think about then? Right? If retreating is really if keeping units alive is the most important thing, the most impactful thing that we can do for our economy, short term and long term, what do we think about? Now, we're going to start off with something a little contrary here. We don't want to always just be retreating from fights. When it comes to particular big fights, we actually want to keep units in for as long as possible. We understand that retreating is really, really important, that we do not want to lose a unit. But we also need to understand that at some point in time, you need to win a big fight, whether it's for a victory point so that you can not lose the game or potentially win the game by draining them out of VPs. A concept to think about now, just to think about, just to have it in the back of your mind, that it'll translate into some things that we'll talk about later in other videos, is keeping units in a big fight for as long as possible. You like that grammar there? I don't. The point is, if you got 3, 4 squads and maybe some vehicles involved in a big old fight and your opponent has the same, your army represents a certain amount of health, and your army also represents a certain amount of potential outgoing damage or DPS, right? And your opponent has the same thing. If you have a squad of infantry and they got 6 models and they get knocked down to 4, and then you retreat them because you're thinking to yourself unit preservation, that's 4 models of infantry that could have stayed in the fight, that could have gotten off a couple more volleys of damage, that could have absorbed a couple more hits. As you pull units out of a fight, your opponent has less and less targets to fire at, which means that focus firing your units gets more and more powerful. It means the amount of damage that your army can do becomes less and less. And thus, we want to keep units in a big fight for as long as possible, basically min-maxing the amount of damage that they have absorbed and the amount of damage that they have dealt. So this is an idea to keep in mind, that though we want unit preservation, if we want to really win a big fight, we need to keep units in for as long as possible. Just stew on that. Just think about that idea. Next, though, do I win this fight? Now you might get involved in a big old fight and maybe you win or maybe you lose. And again, when it comes to pulling units out, when and when not to, that comes with time and practice and experience, which is why we just want to think about it. Big fights happen. Did you win? Did you lose? Did you have units that left too soon, left too late because you lost them? Just think about it. But what about just identifying right out the gate, do you win or not? 2 squads of infantry roll up on your 2 squads of infantry with this cover and your weapons and their weapons. Do you win that fight? Now, obviously, there's a million varying circumstances that might play into that. That just really all comes with time, play experience, learning. Whether you win or lose that fight, just think about, oh, do I win this fight or not? If the answer is yes, then you stay in it and hopefully things go well and you win. What if the answer is no, though? It's actually really important that if you look at a fight and you go, hey, you know what, we don't win that. Maybe it's easy. Maybe 5 squads of infantry roll up on your 1. Do you win that fight? Absolutely not. Not even the tiniest bit. Maybe you need to desperately hold on to that point, and so you keep your squad in the fight to buy time for reinforcements to show up. There's circumstances like that might happen. But just understand that identifying whether or not we win this fight and getting out sooner rather than later will save us manpower bleed. Why? Because they're dealing X amount of damage and we're dealing X amount of damage. If their amount of damage that they're dealing to us is way, 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 way higher, and we have less targets like a single squad, we're just not going to trade effectively. They're going to eliminate 5 models in infantry and we'll eliminate maybe 1, and that's not a good trade for us, right? The way sort of like damage works overall during these fights is that the side that's winning in a fight, as you begin to win and your enemy units begin to lose models and get weaker, your damage output becomes less and less, and your opponent's survivability increases. And now they're dealing more damage, and your damage is down here. So as you're losing a fight, the amount of damage that you deal versus their amount of damage that they're dealing, there becomes a discrepancy, and it gets bigger and bigger. It begins to snowball as you're losing a fight. And so if you can identify more quickly, do I win this fight or not? If the answer is no, the faster you get out, more manpower you save. So what do we put into practice here? Right? We have some things to think about here, some concepts. Keeping units in fights for as long as possible, understanding how important unit preservation is. 1, simplify your front line, but push yourself. What I mean by this is you got a fight over here, and a fight over there, and a fight over here. You got 3 things going on. In those circumstances, are you losing units? Are you losing units because you're having a hard time keeping track of all the things that's going on? Maybe you want to simplify your front lines. Maybe you got units over here and your opponent shows up and he's fighting you. That's a big battle. And then you, at that moment in time, take your two squads over here and you're like, oh, they're not doing anything. Let's go attack this point. And then they get involved in a fight. If that's the case, maybe you just don't move those other two units, right? Maybe if you're having a hard time struggling with keeping track of all the different things that are going on, maybe you simplify. Maybe you just don't take that fight. You back up and focus on one here or there. But it is really important here. Our ability to multitask is sort of a crucial element of playing RTS games in general. So you do want to sort of be pushing yourself, just taking as many fights as you can, practicing, getting used to jumping from one battle to the next. And that sort of comes back to, do I win this fight or not? Because you can look at a battle and go, oh, we win this fight. As is, you don't need to think about it now. You move away, you go look at something else. Of course, that's when your opponent throws a grenade at you and oh no, now you don't win the fight, right? But again, that all just comes with practice. So if you're struggling with this idea, consider simplifying. Consider just backing up a couple of your units and leaving them in a semi-safe place so that you can focus on the battle at hand. You'll lose less units, and that's the most impactful thing. This also sort of turns into the next step here is like, don't panic if you're losing territory. You got to fight over here, and oh no, he's back capping my thing over here. If he decaps the strategic point, I'll lose connection to 2 munition points and a fuel point. That's not ideal. That will hurt your economy. But if you send one unit over there to go deal with that and it's not a good fight, or he has more resources over there than you thought, or he throws a grenade at you, or what have you, losing a territory is not as bad as losing a unit. Especially if you send a unit over there, you take a bad fight, and you end up retreating anyways, you still lose the territory, and you've bled some manpower because you took a bad fight with your infantry. So if you see that you're losing territory, don't panic. Rally your forces, identify the threat, move in with the correct amount of army, and don't be super worried about how much is correct. You're playing, you're learning, so just do what you think is most best and take a good fight, right? So don't panic when you're losing territory and throw away a unit to desperately try to hold on to it for another 10 seconds, or trade a squad of infantry into 5 infantry, and even though maybe you retreated in time, it gets out alive, you didn't really do that much, right? Because again, army results in map control, and map control is your economy. So if you're just mismanaging your army, your economy will suffer. So just don't panic when you're losing territory. Calmly defend. And then make it a goal to lose less. What I've been doing is I'm going into a match and I will say to myself, regardless of what happens, regardless if I win or lose, I will not lose a unit within the first 5 minutes. That's my goal. And then when I started doing that more and more successfully, I will not lose a unit within the first 10 minutes of the match. Right? And that was my goal. And I thought about it and I focused on it. And I even did some retreats too early. I could have kept units in fights for longer, but I was like, nope, I'm scared. I'm gonna retreat it. Just in a general sense, even if you're maybe taking some bad retreats and getting units out of fights maybe too early. At the end of the day, having more material on the board for longer will give you more options to deal with your opponent as the game goes on. What I also really like about this idea, this sort of self-setting goal that I had, was that as the game goes on and you keep more and more units alive, it gets harder and harder and harder to manage everything. Because once you get good unit preservation and you're 15, 20 minutes into the game, you got a crap ton of stuff to manage and deal with, and it gets harder and harder. So don't get super worried about losing a unit all the time. It's going to happen, especially in the late game when the victory points are counting down and you got to fight to the death for something. But just sort of think about it, right? Just think about it, practice in your mind. Oh man, let's not lose a unit before this moment in time. And if you do, you go, dang it, we got to get better at it. Just the act of thinking about it and saying we got to improve, we got to practice, keeping it in the back of your mind along with these other concepts will improve your retreating and your unit preservation, and overall it'll improve your win rate. I promise you. It's such an important factor when it comes to playing Company of Heroes 3. So, in the next video, we're going to be talking about early capture order and taking good fights and sort of understanding the basics of fighting in Company of Heroes 3, especially in the early game, and how we can sort of set ourselves up on the right foot, on the path to victory. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. Comments, feedback, I would highly appreciate it. and I will see you in the future.